He opened a whole can of dog food, but only gave the puppy a small spoonful. The puppy inevitably felt lonely when he saw the pitiful amount of food in the bowl. Little did he know that Finch just licked the spoon with dog food on it. Then, he put all the cans back into the refrigerator. Looking at the few cans in the refrigerator, Finch swallowed reluctantly. Finally, he resolutely closed the refrigerator door and drank some tap water despite his hunger. Looking at the puppy who was reluctant to eat, Finch told it not to worry about him, as he had eaten a lot outside just now. The puppy then wolfed down the food with peace of mind. However, all Finch said were lies, and he even drank water in small sips. Because the outside world was already full of yellow sand. A solar storm in 2026 destroyed the surface of the Earth, and the survivors had to live underground. The solar storm caused serious damage to the ozone layer, causing not only the intensity of ultraviolet rays on the Earth to soar, but also the temperature of the surface to be bizarrely high. Slowly, due to the lack of external environment and resources, there are only a few survivors. Finch is a scientific researcher. He happened to be at the experimental base when a storm broke out, so he was lucky to survive. In order to survive, Finch often has to wear heavy protective clothing and take a mechanical dog out to find food. He has searched almost all the buildings in a city, and his physical condition has deteriorated due to long-term absence. Although he is not afraid of facing death at all, he can't let go of the puppy who depends on him for life. So he used his lifelong learning to build a robot that takes care of the puppy. Although the initial process went smoothly, the robot's torso and limbs were all formed. But it still lacks the most important two eyes. Finch searched the whole city, but couldn't find them. In desperation, Finch could only call the robot dog. The robot dog seemed to be psychic and thought it was going out again, so it seemed particularly excited. Unexpectedly, Finch reached out to its eyes. Finch promised to replace its eyes, then dragged its chin and took out the parts. In an instant, the robot dog seemed to have completed its mission and slowly lowered its head. Then, Finch installed the eyes on the robot. Then, he transmitted a lot of dog-raising information to him. Not only did he teach the robot how to walk, but he also taught him how to communicate effectively. Finally, Finch issued another 4 key instructions: not to harm humans, not to stand idly by and watch humans. Most importantly, when Finch is not around, the puppy must be protected. The 4th instruction overrides all other instructions. Looking at the robot that can fully understand and answer fluently, Finch was moved as if he saw his newborn son. But just as the father and son were communicating with each other, the base where they were hiding suddenly lost power. Finch panicked and immediately came to the top of the windmill. Fortunately, it was just a minor problem. After some debugging, the windmill resumed rotation and the power of the base returned to normal. However, just as Finch turned around and prepared to go back, he was frightened by a scene in the distance. A huge storm with no boundaries was approaching quickly, with thunder and lightning. According to the robot's prediction, the storm will arrive within 24 hours and will last for at least 40 days. But his current food can't even last for 3 days, and he can't go out to collect during this period. Finch decisively took out the canned fruit that he had treasured the longest, took a big bite, and savored the sweetness carefully. Then Finch forced himself to go to San Francisco. The storm there was the weakest, and he might escape the disaster. San Francisco has always been his dream place. The Red Bridge is the passage he walked through in his dreams. Time is running out. Finch began to collect all available supplies. This was the busiest day in the base since the storm. The robot dog wanted to help after hearing it, but it could only bump around because of the lack of parts. Seeing the scene, Finch remembered the promise to the robot dog. Since the base could no longer be lived in, the surveillance camera was useless. So he decisively took it off and installed it on the robot dog. Although there was only one, it was enough. After everything was ready, Finch began their escape. A perfect RV was their last fortress. Next, Finch not only had to beware of other survivors, but also had to teach the new robots how to survive. Along the way, they passed through a wasteland. The fertile land that was once full of flowers was now covered with sand and dust. After an unknown amount of time on the long journey, they finally arrived at the next city. After a brief rest, Finch decided to teach the robot how to search for supplies. But the robot that had just arrived in this world was like an energetic bear child, curious about everything around him. Finch could only tell him helplessly that the most important thing to worry about now was whether there was food. Then they came to a theater where the door was locked and there was no sign of being pried open. Finch tried for a long time but failed to open the lock. In the end, the robot came forward and took down the whole door. After entering the door, facing the robot that had never seen anything, he kept asking questions. Suddenly, he fell silent when passing by a mirror. This was the first time he saw himself. For a moment, it seemed to have self-awareness, but soon the robot withdrew again. Because Finch found a bag of corn kernels, he couldn't wait to show him a fun thing. Finch found a pot lid and handed it to the robot. When the corn was poured into the pot lid, it turned into popcorn. This made the robot excited and stomped his feet. However, just when they were having fun, a huge tornado quickly hit again. At first, Finch wanted to find a shelter quickly, but no matter how fast they drove, they still couldn't get rid of the tornado behind them. Finch realized that if he continued driving like this, he would eventually be swallowed by the tornado. So he stopped the car immediately, got out of the car, took out the long nails and the noose, and prepared to fix the camper directly in place. However, due to his weak body and being on the plateau, Finch was unable to hammer the nail into the ground when fixing the fourth nail. Fortunately, the robot took action in time. It turned out that the robot had learned how to operate in this short period of time. The robot asked Finch to hide in the RV quickly and stayed to deal with the aftermath. Finch also followed his advice, returned to the car to hide the puppy, and sealed all the windows with iron sheets. At this time, the tornado was less than 300 meters away, but the robot was still struggling to tighten the rope outside. Seeing that it was too late, Finch had to tell him to get in the car quickly. The robot jumped into the car at the last moment when the storm came. However, before they could sit firmly, the RV began to shake violently. Then, the unfixed steel cables began to break, first one, then a second and third. Then the whole RV was blown into the air. If the fourth tire broke, they would all be buried in the storm. Fortunately, the fourth tire survived until the end. After everything calmed down, Finch got out of the car wearing protective clothing to check the situation. It turned out that this was the last tire that the robot risked to reinforce, and it was considered that it owed the little guy a life. Finch happily told the robot that it did a good job. Although they survived the storm, one tire was broken. Seeing this, the robot immediately pushed a spare tire. But Finch said that there was no jack to replace it, but he obviously ignored the robot's strength. One hand was enough to support the entire car body. In this way, with the help of the robot, Finch quickly changed the tire. The robot played an indispensable role in this storm, and Finch planned to give him a nice name. After hearing this, the robot also stomped his feet excitedly. Finch wanted to call him Jack, but the robot thought it was the name of a tool. Then the robot said many names of great men, such as Van Gogh and Shakespeare, but Finch rejected them one by one. Finch suddenly thought, what's the point of having a name for just the two of us? However, after some thought, the robot said Jeff. This name also surprised Finch. Jeff thought the name was simple and nice, and it didn't sound like a dog's name. But in the end, Finch's consent was needed, but Finch told him that it was not necessary at all. Then, Finch sincerely stretched out a hand and greeted him, "Welcome to this world, Jeff." As the soft morning light dyed the sky, the solar panels on the roof opened automatically. Finch woke up from the noise. It turned out that Jeff thought the puppy didn't like him. So he planned to learn dog language by barking, but was told that there was no such language at all. The reason why the puppy was unfriendly to Jeff was because he had not established trust with him. Jeff didn't understand what trust was, but Finch didn't know how to explain it. They could only start the car and continue on their way. But not long after, Finch suddenly started to cough violently. For safety and to prevent Jeff from worrying, he parked the car at an abandoned restaurant nearby and prepared to go down alone to recover. By the way, Jeff and the dog also built trust. Because the car door was facing the awning of the gas station, Finch did not wear protective clothing when he got out of the car. However, just when he was coughing and gasping for breath in the restaurant, the barking of the puppy came from outside. It turned out that Jeff wanted to take the dog out of the car, but the puppy who did not trust him was determined not to do so. Finch had to lead the puppy down himself and let Jeff stay outside to guard the RV alone. When he saw them and the dog walk in, Jeff was disappointed. It was like a deflated ball. Dissatisfied, he clasped his hands together, then peeked at Finch through the car window, and then sat in the driver's seat to fiddle with the car. Just when Finch was chatting with the dog, he saw a car passing by the window. Finch was so scared that he rushed to the kitchen door to check the situation. Hearing Finch's shout, Jeff jumped out of the car. But as to why the car moved, Jeff did not admit that he started it. Finch immediately realized that the situation was not good, but he could only suppress his anger. Finch suppressed his anger and asked Jeff to bring protective clothing. At first, Jeff agreed to do it, and after getting in the car, he did not forget to interact with Finch mischievously. But the next second, he started the engine and reversed the car until it hit the pillar and stopped. This scene terrified Finch. However, Jeff, who was unaware, still called himself an excellent driver. At this time, Finch's anger reached its peak. He did not speak, but stretched his hand into the sun. The scorching sun instantly burned his palms to smoke, and he used his own pain to tell Jeff. Finch created Jeff because he needed him to help take care of the puppy. The premise of all this is that Jeff must obey and do as he is told. Jeff lowered his head in disappointment after hearing this, and a trace of guilt seemed to appear on his metal face. He didn't dare to speak until he got in the car, curled up, and hid in a corner. At this time, Finch also realized that as a father-like role, facing the growth of children full of personality, he should be more patient and warm. So Finch decided to ask Jeff to drive himself. And Jeff was also very smart and talented, and he quickly mastered the tricks of driving. Not only that, in order to make Finch happy, Jeff would honk the horn with his head from time to time, adding a bit of joy to the boring journey. As Jeff drove more and more steadily, Finch's face unconsciously showed the kindness of an old father. Even the eyes, when looking at each other, were filled with relief and pampering. Finch wished that he could teach Jeff all the survival skills and principles in a limited time. In this way, he would not have any worries when he left. In order to achieve this goal as soon as possible, Finch began to take every opportunity to guide Jeff. That night, they sat around the campfire and talked, with the magnificent and gorgeous aurora above their heads. If this was the sky of Alaska in the past, Finch would feel extremely happy, because before the disaster, only Alaska had aurora almost every night. But now, due to the destruction of the ozone layer, aurora can be seen in many places at night. But such aurora makes people not want to appreciate it anymore, because it is exchanged for human freedom and the withering of nature. Jeff does not understand emotional perception ability yet, but is just curious why he does not move at night if it is dangerous to go out during the day. After listening, Finch explained carefully that although natural disasters are dangerous, they can be predicted, and as long as they can be predicted, there will be countermeasures. But the night is full of unpredictable crises, such as hungry humans hiding in the dark. They may appear at any time to give a fatal blow, so Jeff must not trust anyone, otherwise he will definitely lose his life. Jeff tried to ask why, but Finch did not answer directly. Instead, he murmured like talking to himself, "When you face things that you cannot control, your emotions will fluctuate. And the way you deal with this matter will define what kind of person you are." Looking at Finch's gradually red eyes, Jeff seems to guess something. But he did not choose to continue asking, but after Finch returned to the RV, he meditated alone from the dark night to the dawn of this day. It was not until he heard the barking of the dog that he came back to consciousness and hurried back to the car. It turned out that Finch's condition was getting worse and worse, and he had coughed up blood and had a high fever. Looking at him curled up in bed in pain, Jeff immediately mobilized the program in his mind to search for ways to relieve the patient's pain. Then, following the instructions, he carefully applied the wet towel to Finch's forehead. Soon Finch fell asleep, and Jeff continued to drive towards San Francisco. At this moment, he was like a grown-up child, carrying all the responsibilities on his shoulders. After an unknown period of time, they came to another abandoned city. After parking the car, Jeff found that Finch was still not awake. But he did not disturb him. Instead, he called the robot dog to get out of the car together and prepare to search for supplies. Because of the experience last time, Jeff quickly locked onto a supermarket this time. After searching, he found a coat and couldn't wait to put it on, because he always wanted to dress up as a human. Then he pried open a locked cabinet and found a lot of medicines and canned food inside. Thinking that these were things that Finch was in short supply, Jeff danced with joy, but at this moment, Finch on the other side suddenly woke up. When he found that Jeff was not there, he ignored his physical weakness and was unable to put on the protective suit and rushed out. As a lone wolf struggling to survive in the end times, Finch can keenly smell the breath of danger. But when he hurried to the supermarket, he was still a step late. The robot dog was lucky to find a box of biscuits, which was more precious than canned food, and biscuits were even more valuable. However, without its owner, it would not sense the danger. When it entered the trap, it was directly crushed by the trap. Finch rushed over after hearing the sound, and the sound of the broken machine was like the cry of a baby. It may be in great pain, but it still tightly grasped its beloved toy ball. Finch looked at the parts on the ground in disbelief, and finally reluctantly turned off the power for it. This time it really completed its mission. Finch could only go to find Jeff immediately. He had already lost one and could not lose all. Fortunately, Jeff was still searching intact. Not only did he not realize that he was in danger, but he even naively showed off his new coat the moment he saw Finch. Although he was anxious and angry, Finch did not dare to say more because staying one more second would increase the danger. The two immediately set off back to the RV and drove away from here as soon as possible. Little did they know that they had already been spotted by the survivors. As soon as their car started to leave, the car hidden in the dark started. Because he was too weak, Finch let Jeff drive the car after getting in the car, and he quickly prepared the gun and bullets. But he fainted just after preparing all this, and it was dark when he woke up again. Unexpectedly, the other party was still chasing them. Because in the end times, violence is the rule, and human flesh is also a chance to prolong life. In order to get rid of the stalker behind him, Finch first asked Jeff to turn off the lights. Fortunately, Jeff's eyes have night vision function. Then he asked Jeff to step on the accelerator, and when the opponent was blocked by the road behind, Finch quickly turned the steering wheel and the car turned off the main road. He wanted to hide under the bridge, but he didn't expect that the modified solar panel exceeded the height limit. Seeing that the pursuer was about to come in front of them, their car was stuck here and couldn't move. At this critical moment, Jeff jumped out of the car regardless of Finch's obstruction. Then he used all his strength and successfully pushed the car under the bridge 1 second before the opponent arrived. Only then did he get rid of the pursuer without any danger. After that, Finch got out of the car to pick up a piece of debris and looked at the roof that was already in a mess. Finch didn't know how far he could run without solar energy, and Jeff didn't know either. Finch vented his anger on Jeff, leaving Jeff standing there helplessly at a loss. The heavy rain drew the curtain as if to put an end to the performance. But Jeff soon mustered up the courage to return to the car. Even though Finch said that he couldn't trust others easily, Jeff still trusted Finch from the bottom of his heart. However, Finch just smiled bitterly after hearing this and then told a story. When the disaster first started, the world fell into chaos. At that time, people could fight over a bag of bread and bleed. Finch hid in the supermarket waiting for other survivors to leave. But he didn't remind a little girl who was also in the supermarket. The little girl walked out of the door with a confused look on her face. Those brutal survivors killed the little girl mercilessly for supplies. Finch was full of guilt, as if his conscience was going to kill him. He used the life of a little girl in exchange for his own safety. When he walked out, everything had returned to calm. But there was a sound from the little girl's school bag. It turned out that the little girl's puppy was hiding inside. In order to make up for his guilt towards the little girl, Finch has adopted the puppy until now. But that scene has become his nightmare. Hunger can turn a person into a murderer, but it turns him into a coward. It is a scar that can never be erased, and it is also a sharp sword that always warns him not to fall. And this is why he insisted on creating Jeff to take care of the puppy on his behalf after he knew that he had little time left. Fortunately, Jeff really grew into a responsible person in a short period of time. After a night, Jeff drove on the road again. At this time, they were still 772 kilometers away from San Francisco. For Jeff, this was hope. However, when he turned his head to tell Finch, who was resting in the back, the good news, a butterfly suddenly hit the windshield. Jeff, who didn't know why, was frightened and stopped the car immediately. Finch also came over to check the situation. Unexpectedly, when Finch opened the door handle and tentatively reached out to the sun, he was not burned like before. Finch got out of the car in disbelief. He didn't know whether the ozone layer here was originally not damaged or the Earth was repairing itself. But he knew that without the protective suit, the feeling of being surrounded by the sun again was like being in the warm embrace of his mother. Just as he was feeling the breeze, a butterfly fluttered to his fingertips, inviting him to appreciate the lost and regained world. Jeff also imitated Finch, first looking up at the sky in silence and then shaking his mechanical body. It seemed that he really felt the joy of mankind. To celebrate this long-lost freedom, Finch put on a brand new white suit and an elegant gentleman's white hat. Then Finch and Jeff sat under the parasol together, eating canned food and chatting leisurely. Jeff said, "I found a postcard in the car with your father's message and signature. Can you tell me what the story is?" Originally, Finch didn't want to reveal his father's affairs because it has always been a regret in his heart. But now he has not much time left and wants to bring this regret to another world, so he spoke after thinking for a long time. It turns out that since Finch was born, he has never seen his father who left home for work. Until his 15th birthday, he received this postcard of the Golden Gate Bridge. Since then, he has been looking forward to meeting his father one day, and he even bought this expensive suit for this purpose. But to this day, his father has not appeared. Later, Finch wanted to travel around the world, but because of health and work reasons, he never left Missouri. Finch felt that this was not living, just like you can listen to others say how long, high, and majestic the Gate Bridge is. but only those who really stand on the bridge and listen to the sound of the suspension cables echoing in the wind can have a real experience and really live. After hearing this, Jeff excitedly suggested, "We can set off now and stand on the Golden Gate Bridge in 18 hours. And last night, I flashed in my mind the picture of the three of us standing side by side on the Golden Gate Bridge, watching the sun rise from the clouds." But Finch didn't get excited after hearing this, but said calmly, "I'm going to die." Jeff was stunned for a moment of silence. He had never felt heartbroken, but now he felt heartbroken. However, Finch was most worried about the puppy, so he asked Jeff again to take good care of the puppy. Jeff nodded silently and then played with the toy ball with the dog under Finch's demonstration. However, every time he threw the ball, the puppy would deliberately bypass him and hand the ball back to Finch. Even if Jeff stood between them, it would not help. After several attempts, Jeff was very discouraged. He thought that the puppy did not trust him. But Finch said that it takes time to build trust, and you can slowly get along in the future. However, as soon as he finished speaking, Finch started coughing violently. The blood also stained the precious suit red. It seemed that he really didn't have much time. Seeing this, Jeff hurriedly helped him back to the RV, but Finch used up his last bit of strength to break free. Then he slowly stretched out his hands and held Jeff, and Jeff seemed to feel the separation and reluctantly leaned on Finch's chest. There are always some hugs that make people burst into tears. There is always some warmth that blooms in the warm sunshine. But the cold reality is always so cruel. After taking a last look at Jeff with reluctance and relief, Finch trembled and walked into the RV. The dog followed behind him, ready to accompany him for the last journey. After quietly packing his luggage, Jeff sat alone in the sunset and meditated. How he wished that he was an emotionless, cold-blooded machine at this moment, because then there would be no sadness in his heart and a few sunsets hung on the ridges in the darkening desert. Suddenly, the dog's cry came from the RV, echoing in the wilderness with endless sorrow. Finch died alone, but Jeff did not go over to check on him immediately. Instead, he looked silently in the direction of the RV. If he could shed tears at this moment, the tears would surely drown the entire dune. After sorting out his mood, Jeff prepared a simple funeral for Finch. Watching the flames burning under the vast starry sky, Jeff put on his hat and mourned deeply. When the fire faded and the morning light was dim, Jeff imitated Finch's previous behavior. First, he filled the RV with gas and then tried to open the can to feed the puppy. But because his fingers were too thick, he couldn't succeed. Just when he was at a loss, the machine on his chest suddenly sucked the can in. It turned out that Finch had thought of this problem a long time ago, so he installed the parts for opening the can in advance. However, after doing all these things, Jeff seemed to have lost his direction. He sat alone in front of the door of the camper, like a child waiting for guidance. Suddenly, the puppy walked up to him and put the ball in his mouth next to him. It turned out that trust has always been there, and Jeff picked up the ball like picking up inheritance. At this moment, he finally knew where to go next. So Jeff drove the camper and set off again at dawn, with Finch's last wish and their common wish. Later, Jeff buried Finch's ashes next to the Golden Gate Bridge. There were green grass and butterflies everywhere, and Jeff stood on the Golden Gate Bridge as he had dreamed. Looking at many photos taken here, he also left a postcard of his family of 3. Then Jeff started the new journey with the puppy. Finch is directed by Miguel Sapochnik, starring Tom Hanks, a science fiction movie released in 2021. When the world collapsed and the end of the world came, humans began to kill each other for resources, resulting in few humans left on the earth. But the surviving Finch was willing to give all his only food to a dog he had raised since childhood. Not only that, because he had cancer and didn't have much time left, he also specially created a robot to take care of the dog in the future. Originally, the robot was just a cold machine that received instructions. But in the gradual imitation and learning, he not only had his own consciousness, but also had human perception and emotions. So that it brought a lot of trouble to Finch. However, it was in the quarrels and run-ins with him that Finch found an outlet to vent his heart. So before he died, he forgave himself for the past and experienced the father-son relationship he had never felt before. Well, today's movie sharing is here. Welcome everyone to like, comment, and forward thank you for your patience in watching. Looking forward to meeting you next time.